Hello, everybody. This is Bryon Nelson Jr. of the Leave It to Beaver fan club on Facebook, as well as the new Leave It to Beaver, still the Beaver fan page, also on Facebook. Today we're going to be talking to Richard Carell, who played Richard Rickover, Beaver's best friend on Leave It to Beaver, and we're going to talk about his father's career, as well as his career in Leave It to Beaver, as well as his adult career, which spans on to many, many different sitcoms out there. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview.
Rich Carell, welcome to Fancounters. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I'm getting ready for Christmas, and I'm sitting out here enjoying the sun in Los Angeles. And, I'm here with my wife, and we're having a great time.
Well, we wish you had some snow, but we know that won't happen out there, at least not as much and as lingering as we get it here in Wisconsin. Now, I'm here with Bryon Nelson Jr., and Bryon actually did a lot of deep dive research on you. He gets a lot of credit for some of these very creative questions, which I'm going to let him start out with because he's going to predate you. He wants to know a little bit about your father.
Okay, great.
All right, so your father, he started his career way back in the 1920s. We're approaching 100 years. We're in the 2020s. So his career was around the mid 1920s. So
right.
Are there any projects of his that stand out as one of your favorites? How would you compare that to your career?
I was always really proud of my dad and Freeman Gosden. They created a show that obviously the public liked, and it was also this kind of watershed show for the whole history of radio in particular, because they were the first guys that had what was called a continuing strip show, which was strip meaning 5 days a week. They also were some of the first guys that ever went into syndication with not only a radio show but with a printed comic strip in a newspaper, which was the Chicago Tribune, when they were doing Sam and Henry, and that was from 26 to 28. And then once they became as popular as they did, and today, if you look at a lot of radio and read about what radio historians say, they still say that for overall popularity, probably the most famous and most popular show was Amos and Andy.
Mm-hmm.
They were on the air for 33 years, and I was really proud of all the hard work they did, especially in the first 15 years when they played all the characters and wrote all the scripts. So that was a lot of work, and those guys did great, and they always loved the public. They were always thinking about the public, and they really respected the public. And by the way, that includes the black public, because they had legions of black fans,
right.
A lot of whom thought Amos and Andy were part of their family, and some of whom thought that Amos and Andy were actually black actors. But I really admired what they did. So obviously my dad's, my favorite project of his was the Amos and Andy radio show. And it had various versions of it, which, as I said, started as a 15-minute show and then went on to a half-an-hour show and then became a television show. And so it's like all of that was very successful, and I was very proud of him about it. And even as a kid, I was proud of what he did and who he was. And the fact that he was such a humble, nice guy was even better, because he could have been, he could have had a big ego about it, and he never did. He wasn't that kind of guy. He was a very humble guy. So my favorite project of his was always the radio show.
Now, you watched him work really hard, and he must have also inspired you as far as you wanting a career in the entertainment industry. Can you tell us about what you saw in his work that led you to the same kind of situation?
Well, actually, it was kind of on the contrary. My parents, who were both, really embedded in show business, never expected or pushed any of the siblings in our family to go into show business. My entrance into show business was a bit of an accident. I mean, I had my dad around. I realized he was a good actor. And when I was a little kid, I was always doing school plays and making my own movies and things like that. I always liked stuff like that. But I don't think it was necessarily my dad's, saying, you should be in show business, because one of the things that I remember that my dad taught me that was really important in my life, in show business especially, was that he said, when I was like 8 years old or something, he said, look, don't ever try to figure out show business. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, it makes no sense. Water in Hollywood runs uphill. He said, you'll see some really talented people who never make it, and you'll see some people who make it really big who don't have that much talent, and then there's everybody in between. The really talented people, the people who don't have a lot of time, but don't ever try to figure it out. Don't ever come home and go, I don't understand why that's a hit, or I don't understand why this person is working and that person isn't. He said you'll never be able to figure it out because a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is timing, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time. So don't ever try to figure it out. If you're going to get into this business, it's something you'll never figure out. Just roll with it and have fun. And he also said, always be nice to everybody, not just the people who are higher up. He said, both on the stages or the people that do the work or in the trenches are just as important. So always be really, really nice to everybody. Those are the two really main things he talked about. But I didn't want to be long-winded about it. Just in answering your question, my entrance in the show business was a bit of an accident, but it wasn't because my parents were pushing it. They never pushed it, really. If we had gone into any other kind of career, I'm sure they would have supported us.
Sure.
Now, if there's anyone out there who does not know who your father is, that'd be Charles Correll. Now, he was a stenographer and a bricklayer before he went into the show business. Now, what got him into radio and television as a writer? That's a pretty big jump.
There's a one-word answer to that, and that is music. My dad's father was a bricklaying contractor. So he taught my father the bricklaying trade. And remember, my dad was born in 1890. So my dad actually should have been my grandfather. But back in 1890, the world was changing quite a bit. But my dad and his family, they were all in the bricklaying business. So my dad's father taught my dad how to be a bricklayer. The stenography thing came just because Dad really liked that type of work when he was in school, and in high school he was a really good typist. And remember, in those days everybody typed on manual typewriters, so it was a lot harder than it is now, but he was good at that. But when he was 10 years old, my dad's father asked him if he'd be interested in taking piano lessons. And my dad's family didn't have a lot of money, but my dad's father put some money aside for him to take piano lessons, and my dad took to the piano. He kind of had a musical streak in him anyway, but he took the piano. He could read music, but he turned into this really, really strong kind of like saloon piano player. And by that I mean he could play all the local songs that people knew, and he could play by ear really well. And he played at his high school graduation, and in those days people didn't run around with electric guitars and things like that, so he would go to parties and be kind of the life of the party, playing piano for his friends and stuff. So he really enjoyed music, and music changed everything for him because of music. In 1918 he got a job working out of Chicago for a company called the Joe Bren Company, and the Joe Bren Company was famous for putting on home talent shows. Home talent shows in those days were like, the local versions of vaudeville, where they would go into towns and, they would get the mayor and the citizens and they'd put on these shows and everybody would come to these things. And that was a big business. And so this was a company that did that. Would travel around with the costumes and the music and all. And he was playing the music and taking care of all of that stuff, actually directing these live shows. And when he ran into a bit of a problem with the cast that just couldn't seem to pull it off in Durham, North Carolina, he wired back to the Joe Bren Company. This was in 1919. He wired back to the Bren Company. He said, look, I need a troubleshooter. I need someone to come out here and help me. And they said, well, we got this new guy who joined us just a couple of months ago who's from the South, from Richmond, Virginia. His name's Freeman Gaza, and he's going to come out and help you. And that was in 1919. And again, that was strictly an accident. So my dad was really, really lucky. But again, to answer your question, not staying a stenographer and not staying a bricklayer, all of that changed because of music. My dad could play the piano and was really good, and that got him into Nickelodeons, that got him into stage shows, and it got him into radio eventually.
Now, one of the shows that we have reunited on this program is the new Leave It to Beaver. You were a member of the original Leave It to Beaver. You played a character that was Beaver's best friend.
Beaver's best friend, Richard Rickover.
Yep. So let's dive into a little Leave It to Beaver stuff because, having this audience have heard so many stories already about the new show, let's talk a little bit about the old show. Now, you and Jerry Mathers are still lifelong friends. Do you recall your first day on set and how you met, and if you clicked right away? And can you walk us a little bit about how your entrance to that show happened after it had already been on the air for a few years by then?
Yeah, I got into television in 1957. Beaver started, I think, around the same time, maybe a hair later than that. But I was, acting and doing kid parts, and I had an agent, and I was running around. I had a couple of shows under my belt, and I actually went to an audition for Leave It to Beaver, although because we were so close to the Conley family, and that includes Joe Conley had a son my age named Ricky, and Ricky Conley was actually, in my opinion, he was Beaver, because Joe would always write about his family. He had a large family and the kids, and all these things that Ricky did, and actually some things that Ricky and I did were kind of an influence for that. But anyway, I was out doing a number of shows, and there was an audition for Leave It to Beaver, and Joe Conley told my dad, you should have Richard come in and read for this. But we still had to go through my agent, and we still had to go through a casting call. And when I arrived at Universal to read for this part, there were still other kids auditioning for it too. So when I read for it, I didn't know if I'd gotten it or not. Just like any of the other shows you did, because I was in a number of shows, but I read for a lot more. And, you do these shows and you don't know if you're going to get the part. So when you go in, you're there with a kind of a cattle call of kids, and, you read and you leave thinking, I did pretty well, but I don't know, are they going to call? And, most of the time they didn't. But in this case, they called me back and said, okay, you got the part. And, you guys, I don't remember if, when I read for this originally, if that character was named Richard or it was later named Richard. I don't remember. I don't remember sitting down and going, oh, well, I'm doing this, character named after me or something. But anyway, I got the part. And so, the following week I came into work. I think it was a 3-day call for the first show I ever did. And we went to stage 17 at Universal because the show had moved from Republic Studios in its first 2 years over to Universal. And we were on stage 17, and on stage 17, there was a schoolroom, just a regular schoolroom like you'd have at a regular school. It wasn't big, but it was a schoolroom, and there was a woman named Irene Burke, who was the president of the teachers union, the on-set teachers union. And she saw that, I was 3 weeks older than Jerry, and, she asked me about what I liked and, what I was studying in school and what I was, that's what she was supposed to do. And she just thought that I had some similarities to Jerry, so she sat me in a desk literally next to Jerry from the first day. And so aside from the time where you're reading or doing your lessons, Jerry and I were just hanging out and talking, and it was we clicked immediately. We liked model cars and building that stuff. We loved Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. We liked all the horror movie stuff. We just had all of this stuff in common. We both had Catholic families. My mom was like a professional Catholic, and his mom was very Catholic. It was, everything clicked. We were exactly the same size. We wore exactly the same size clothes. We were exactly the same height. It was just really cool. It just clicked like that. And, from the first day, Jerry was warm and inviting, and he was just super nice. By the time I finished that first week, we were like buds. And I think after I got that episode, I think I did another 2, like I did 3 in a row. And literally by the time the third one started, I think he had already been to my house.
Wow.
Excuse me, or
Fast
I'd been
friends.
to his house. We were just hanging out. We were buds. But it started, it's like when you go to school and meet someone you just click with. And Jerry was great. And he was, like, just a total bud. And by the way, he's been that way. We've been friends for 62 years. And I was best man at his wedding. So it's like we were really, really good friends.
Wow.
So this has been a question on my mind. I didn't think to put it down, but your family was really close with Conley and Mosier. And my question is, I thought I've heard at some point that Eddie Haskell, his character came from a actual person named Eddie Haskell that was a friend of one of their children. Does that ring a bell with you?
No, not not that story in particular, but Ricky Conley was my age. Jerry was my age. And so when Joe Conley created that show, he was watching Ricky and his friends. We had a really close friend named Terry Fautre, F-O-T-R-E. Terry Fautre was Larry Mondello. Terry was a heavy-set guy that was always, getting into things and taking stuff apart and doing crazy things and eating a little bit too much and, kind of influencing Ricky to do stuff. So Larry Mondello was Terry Fautre. Ricky Conley was Beaver, and Ricky had an older brother named Jay Conley, and that was Wally. And then Jay Conley had a bunch of friends, some of whom Mr. and Mrs. Conley liked, and a couple of which they didn't like. And one of, I don't know in particular Jay's friends. My older brother Charlie was a friend of Jay's as well. But Jay Conley had some friends who I think Mr. Conley thought one of them was like a scam artist, and that became Eddie Haskell. But there wasn't anybody, a real person named Eddie Haskell that this character was named after. No, I've never heard that story.
Okay.
One of the questions that I always wonder is when people, and of course in your time era is a lot different than the social media area that we're in right now, but when you are on television, and even Jerry too, and you guys are going out and you're hanging out at an arcade or whatever you guys would do back then, would you get recognized by fans? And what was it like at that time to be recognized for being on TV? Was it a big deal or not?
Well, it was fun. I mean, I always thought that was fun. The one time it was a bit strange is my dad took us to Washington, D.C. This is while Bieber was in production, so this would be around 60, 61. And we actually were traveling with a TV host named Art Linkletter. And everybody knew who Art Linkletter was. And so people started to come around. We were at the Smithsonian. And people started to come around looking at Art Linkletter. And a girl about my age recognized me so that she told some friends, hey, there's this guy from Leave It to Beaver. And then that became 3 people, and that became 5 people, and that became like 7 people, and then some of the parents. And so suddenly this group started to gather and follow me around, not so much Art. And my parents began to worry about it, so they had to get security to kind of come and take us away and take us through the back parts of the Smithsonian where we were to escape this group of people. But the rest of the time, it was really fun. Now, you got to remember that I wasn't a star that had the kind of status that Jerry had.
Right.
I mean, everybody knew who Jerry was. So if Jerry and I went down to Westwood Village for the movies on a Sunday afternoon, most kids, who wouldn't really bother them, maybe they would wave or something like that, but most of the kids down there recognized him. And then if we were in a theater and kids knew he was there, they would wait for him to come out. But you guys, that was basically maybe a couple of people would ask for autographs or people would wave. But in those days, people didn't have like cell phones and run around with cameras. And,
no.
I mean, it just wasn't like that. So really, most of the time, it was pretty normal for us to just exist as kids. But I wasn't that big a star. I mean, I was recognizable to some people. I mean, not like the way Jerry was. But for the most part, people didn't really bother me. They just kind of left me alone. And I don't know if a lot of people recognize me or not. In my own school, where I was always enrolled, the kids never treated me any different at all, ever, no matter what I did. And that was the guys or the girls. It was like, oh, you're doing the show? Yeah, that's fine. Next, it was like they just paid no attention, which was great because we all were, grew up as normal kids.
One of the episodes I wanted to make sure that I got to ask you about was the Sweatshirt Monsters, because I know you're a big horror fan guy. And that was an episode in which Beaver and his friends came up with these hideous sweatshirts. It had a face with horns on it. And, of course, June was outraged that the boys would wear something like this. I think my big question is, because I know you're a collector, did you get to keep that sweatshirt, or have you had it recreated so that it's in your collection?
There's a guy that makes those things. He's on the internet. You can look him up, and he makes perfect replicas of those, and he makes them in color. So they're really, really cool. I didn't even think to bring that when I went to Gallatin. I should have brought it with me. But no, I didn't keep that. Again, you guys, we didn't ask in those days about stuff like that. The story of me going to the makeup lab and fishing a head out of the trash is 100% true. I found a head from Abbott and Costello, meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I found one of the Mr. Hyde heads, but it was in the trash because somebody just junked it. And I took that out of the trash. I asked the guy there if I could take it. And he said, sure. And that's what started the whole collecting thing for me. But getting back to what you were talking about, you come on the set, you know your lines, you're kids, but you still have to be professional. I can remember when Tony and Jerry and I would run around the lot, or Steve Talbot and Jerry and I, we'd run around the lot. We'd have a lot of fun. We'd check things out. Sometimes we'd commandeer a golf cart or something, but we still had to be back on time, not late, know our lines, be professional, because people wouldn't put up with it if you weren't. I mean, we had to do our job. So, I wasn't really focused on, can I keep props or can I do this? Or, I mean, who knew that, Sweatshirt Monsters would be such a famous episode? But no, I never asked really about stuff like that because, you're a pro working there and you don't really want to kind of bother people. You don't want to be known as, oh, this is the guy that wants to keep his wardrobe or something like that. So
True.
We just never thought of that in those days. It just kind of passed by.
So now, was there a time that your father would be a guardian for you on the set? And when he was, if he was, all the time.
Yeah,
okay.
all the time. He did it all the time. Amos and Andy was winding down. They were doing the Amos and Andy Music Hall by the time I started working. And the Amos and Andy Music Hall, even though it was a half-hour show, would be recorded in blocks. So they would go in like on a Tuesday and do 3-4 shows in one day, or they did do the same thing, in a week and a half. So my dad was beginning to run into having some spare time. And he used to come down on the set all the time, which was great because I'd run my lines with him, the night before. So he was like my acting coach. And, I'd go through all that stuff with him. And then when I was down on stage, he'd be watching me perform. But again, as I said, being professional, having my dad there as a guardian, you better be professional because he was such a good actor and so professional. He would watch, and at the end of the day, he'd say, I really like the way you did that, and wasn't that cool the way you guys did? Yeah, he was great. He had all this enthusiasm for it, but he came down a lot as a guardian. I spent a lot of time with him, going, getting up early, going to breakfast early, going to the studio, doing my job and coming home. He was kind of the guy who drove me around, and then he was, my guardian on stage. And so that was great. It was great quality time with my dad.
And I'm sure it was really cool for him to be able to kind of reunite with Joe and Bob, too.
Yeah, they would come down and visit from time to time. And, Correll and Gosden gave Connolly and Mosier a huge break. I mean, the biggest break they ever got was coming on to the Amos and Andy show early on, because they became the guys that were like the showrunners. But Joe Connolly loved my dad, and he was always very close to him. And he always thought that, my dad had really helped his career, so he was grateful for it. And Joe was great that way. But he would come around. But, Connolly and Mosier were busy. I mean, they would make 39 of those episodes a year. Later on, sitcoms would be like 24 episodes, 22 episodes a year. But this is when they were making 39 a year, so they were really busy. They weren't around too much. But they would come down and visit from time to time. But Joe and my dad socialized away from the studios a lot more. Like every party we ever had, Joe was always at the party, and my dad would go to San Francisco with he and his wife and my mom. And they socialized a lot because they were like best friends.
So now there's always a love-hate relationship between the audience and characters and who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, such. Now, there's also times where the fans have a crush on a girl. Now, you working with these actresses, was there a time where you had a crush on a certain co-star?
The person that I had the biggest crush on was Lori Martin. Lori Martin, who played Velvet on National Velvet, which was across the city at the MGM lot. She was the person I had an amazing, I was like totally smitten with her. I just thought she was great. And I kept talking to Jerry about it. As a matter of fact, what's really funny is, because later on she did an episode of Leave It to Beaver, but that's not one that I was in. I had already gone to high school. It was one, I think it was in the last season. But Jerry and I kind of tried to sit down and plot how we could figure out a way to meet her. And Jerry was like, yeah, that's fine, whatever, Lori Martin. But he knew I was crazy about her, so he was like, he would like we would try to figure out how to meet her. And then strangely enough, I was cast in an episode of Dr. Kildare, and this was at the same time I was doing Beaver. And I'll never forget this guy. The guy who was the casting director for a number of those shows at MGM, including Dr. Kildare, was a guy named Buzz Berger. I'll never forget that guy. And I really liked him, and he really liked me, and I did auditions for him. He would call me in for all kinds of stuff. Well, it turns out that he was the casting guy in National Velvet, and the only time that a role came up that I literally said, I have to get it, I have to get it, I have to get it. Because you don't want to psych yourself up like that, because usually you don't get it. The only time I ever did that was for National Velvet. And I went, I read, and I got the part. And I was like, oh, my God, the girl of my dreams, I'm going to meet her. This is going to be so great. Actually, that turned into a reoccurring thing, too. I think I did 3 of them or something. But anyway, that's how I got to meet Lori Martin. And, she was beautiful, and, I thought she was really fun, and she was nice. But she was also a year older than me, which when you're 13 and 14 is a huge difference. And always made it really clear, oh, my boyfriend's going to pick me up, and my boyfriend and I are going to go do this. And so it was like, So, I loved her, and she was great, and not a disappointment at all. But, I had no chance of ever being with her because she was, like, taken. And she was a big star and, probably got 5,000 fan letters a week, and there was just no way. I was happy to work with her. And, Jerry would say to me, all right, so now you know her. Are you still crazed? Is this thing still going on? It was like, well, yeah. I still think she's really cool. But, nothing ever came of it. But I did have a good time working with her. And I was really lucky to get on that show.
It was really funny. We were having dinner in Gallatin after the event, and I had to mention that, Jerry got to work with her twice. Now, was that your only time that you got to work with Lori Martin?
I worked with her only on National Velvet, but as I said, I did 3 episodes. So, and I was always cast as a bad guy. So on that, always cast on that show. So it was always, there was another actor, a guy named Ricky Kellman, really good guy, really nice guy, very, very friendly. He was kind of like Velvet's boyfriend. And I think Ricky was like my age too. And Ricky was like, yeah, Lori, she's fine, whatever. That figures, the guy that gets to spend all the time with her is kind of like, yeah, I'm fine, But Ricky was a super nice guy, but he was in all of the episodes that I did. And I think he had a lot more screen time with her. So he spent more time with her. And I was always thinking, I'm lucky to be on the show. I wish I was spending as much time with her as Ricky did. But, guys, it was all, it's puppy love. It was like, I was 13 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I just had this crush on this girl. As I said, when I met her, she didn't disappoint me, but it was like it was just ridiculous. There was no way that she would pay any attention to me, aside from the fact that she had lines and scenes with me. And, hi, good morning, how are you? Having a nice day. Did you have a good lunch? See ya. That's how that worked. That's, that's the only time I worked with her. And Jerry worked with her. He did a Beaver, and then didn't he do like Love American Style or something with her? She played his wife or something in it.
Yeah, that was in My 3 Sons.
Oh, My 3 Sons, that was it. Yeah. Well, and by the way, and Jerry was like, whatever. He wasn't. It didn't hit him the way it hit me.
We want to talk a little bit about the new Leave to Beaver. You were instrumental in getting the series started. Can you share a little bit about how the series came back around to be? Now, we know that there was that TV movie and then eventually went into the series, but can you let us know the insides about how, what it was like from your side bringing that show back to life?
I actually, everything about New Leave It to Beaver and Still the Beaver, everything was about Bryon Levant. Bryon Levant was this really, really, still is, a huge Beaver fan who was a very successful comedy writer. He ended up executive producing Happy Days. I worked with him every day because I was working on Happy Days, first as an associate producer and then kind of like as a line producer, and then I was writing with Fred Fox, and Fred was executive producing the show with Bryon. So we were all really good friends. But Bryon was crazy about Leave It to Beaver. He was an expert on Happy Days in all the episodes, and he was an expert on Leave It to Beaver. But he wanted to do Still the Beaver, and he pushed and finally got that sold. And that was a very successful TV movie. And he said to me, I want you to play Richard. And I said, fantastic. And they went on a big search to try to find Rusty Stevens, who no one could find. I think they ended up finding him in New Jersey or something like that.
Hey, Richard, look, New Jersey. Yeah.
But, it was Bryon. So after they made the movie, in the back of Bryon's head, he always said, look, I think we should do another series about Leave It to Beaver. And, you guys, the thing is, I love Beaver, and I love my time on it, and I love being part of the history of it, and I love my connection with the producers and the writers and everything. I loved it. But I didn't want to continue my life as a Beaver cast member. I was, much more interested in behind the scenes, even as a kid. Thank God I was working for Gary Marshall. Gary Marshall advanced me, after 6 months of starting with Gary Marshall, he made me associate producer of Laverne and Shirley. It was the number 2 show in the country, which was really lucky for me. And that started back in 77, 78. And, I was just, rolling along, and, I was doing pretty well, and the producing thing was good. I was about to start directing, and I just didn't want to be, part of the Beaver thing forever. It was fun while it lasted. I was happy to do a couple of the new Leave It to Beavers. I wrote a couple of the scripts. I was in a couple of the episodes. Happy to do it. Always had fun working with my friends. But I was doing other stuff. I was more interested in other stuff. So I was just kind of moving along. Stephen Talbot was that way as well, because as a documentary filmmaker, he wanted to be taken much more seriously than a guy who was a kid actor in a comedy years before. But he was usually busy when we would ask him to do things, because they asked him to be in Still the Beaver and he couldn't do it. And they asked him to do some of the Beaver reunions things and he couldn't do that. But, Steve's one of the nicest guys. You can't imagine. He's such a good guy. His father, Lyle Talbot, was a really good actor as well. But it was just for him, it was kind of the same thing with me. It was a bit unspoken, but it was still, we've done our thing with Beaver and all, and so we have other things to do. Because Bryon asked me if I would appear in a number of the episodes almost as a regular, and he said, for that I'll let you produce it and I'll let you direct some of them. And I didn't want that to be the caveat. I wanted to be a guy that walks on the stage, not because I was the member of a cast from years ago, but because people wanted me to be there because I had ability and I could the script along, and I could, do things on time and on budget, and it was just a whole different thing. But I was more into that than I was into the older stuff. And I'm an extremely nostalgic person and really proud of the stuff we did. I just didn't want to relive it. So when you ask me about the new Leave It to Beaver, that's really all Bryon LeVant. Bryon LeVant's the one that thought of it, that wrote it, that had the passion for it, that got it sold. He's the guy that really ran everything. It didn't have much to do with me.
And he was really he was very good at finding everybody. You worked with him on other shows, but he was able to find people that were unfindable. Pamela Baird had no agent at the time that she made a small appearance. He was able to get somebody in there just a little bit, just to be able to say, yeah, we got them back on the show, which was kind of cool.
Well, I just remember that the biggest problem was trying to find Rusty, because everybody wanted to find Rusty, and it was a really unusual situation. I don't even know if Rusty, where he is anymore. I didn't keep up with him. It was unusual because Rusty had almost no memory of Leave It to Beaver. If you put me in a car and blindfolded me and took me down to Universal and said, here, we're letting you loose, I could walk you to Stage 17. I could tell you what entrances we came in, where we went to the bathroom, where we played basketball, where the schoolroom was. I remember the stuff on the back lot. I remember some of the stories back there and stuff with the kids and stuff with Steve and all these things with Jerry and Jerry's house. And I remember everything about that time because it was such a great time. Rusty said he had no memory of Larry Mondello of any kind. We said, well, that can't be. And he said, well, I don't remember anything about it. And Bryon came to me and said, look, we hired him for this movie, and I want you, meaning me, Rich, to like sit down and talk with him about Larry Mondello and tell him how Larry Mondello acted. And I thought, well, why is Richard Rickover telling Larry Mondello how he acted?
Yeah.
It's like, it was really weird, but it was just, it was strange. It was like he had no recollection of probably one of the best things he ever did in his life. I can remember that thing literally like it was yesterday.
That's
where
bizarre.
we were, who was there, how people dressed, how the sets looked, everything. I remembered everything about it, but this guy literally remembered nothing about it. I don't know how that happens. I really don't.
Wow. Was it weird reconnecting and seeing people after 20 years? I mean, your career had continued to advance and you were doing new things and growing new skills and getting, working your way up the ladder. And to come back now and see some people who had either left the business, like you just mentioned with Rusty, or, just even reconnecting with Jerry and Tony on the set. What was it like when everybody kind of came together? Was it kind of like nobody ever broke up?
Oh, it was a blast. Yeah. If you have really, really good friends, you don't need to see them every day or even every week. But when you do see them, it's like you've seen them all the time. And that's how it was on the Leave It to Beaver cast for the reunions and also for the movies. I was really looking forward to that. I wanted to see Ken, who was always really nice to us, Ken Osmond, really great. I wanted to see Frank, who was really nice to us. Mm-hmm. These guys were like 3 and 4 years older than we were on the stage, so they could have blown us off, little kids, who cares? But they never did. They were like super friendly, really nice. I wanted to see all those people. Barbara Billingsley, was literally one of the nicest people in Hollywood. She was like our den mother. I mean, literally from the first day I met her, she was a sweetheart. Just, interested in you and your school and your family and what you were doing. And she was just so nice. In between working with her, in between, shots, she talked to you about everything.
Nice.
She was great. She was just so nice. And, the same thing with Tony. I mean, Tony could have been a guy that goes, these are the little kids, and I'm a teenager, and I have my license now, and I'm not going to hang with these guys. And that's not the case. He was always really, really nice and around, and always was interested in stuff. He was just a great guy. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I always look forward to stuff like that, but when you're getting back together and working again, it's even more fun. So I had a blast, and I was looking forward to it, and I wasn't disappointed because everybody was psyched. It was really cool to be back again.
Yeah, we've asked everybody that we've talked to who's been involved in the new show what they would envision if it were to come back in the 21st century in today. So today's Mayfield, and this is kind of cool because you're a writer, so it was kind of unfair because Eric and Christian Osmond, they were kind of thrown through a loop. They weren't writers, so they pretended to be writers. But what would you have going on in Mayfield right now?
Well, I mean, obviously everybody's tied into the internet, so you have to work that, at least in a positive nature, into what kids are doing on the internet. People have cell phones. The world is a lot closer than it used to be. Information is a lot more readily accessible. You have to work that in. But I always kind of was this positive guy about family and family values and all this other stuff. So I would keep the kids together. I would show more of the parents' influence on kids. I think a lot of that has gone away these days. I think it's out there, but I don't think you see it so much in the media, and I don't think you see it so much in entertainment where the kids relied on their parents to help them and tell them things. So I would play to that because I still think that there's a lot of this country, especially middle America and things like that, where those values are the same. So I would try to bring that to Hollywood as best I could. But you got to upgrade. Kids are running around with phones. So are you going to use the phone for a good reason, or are you going to use the phone for a bad reason? And in my opinion, if I were a writer, I'd always be using it for a good reason. When I was making the Miller Boyette shows, there was something at the end of all of those shows which got to be a bit hokey. It was actually called the Miller Boyette moment. It was by a lot of the guys. actually making these shows, especially in Hollywood, where, you would learn something, or the kids would get in trouble and then they would have to apologize, or they'd have to help their friends, or something would be warm, or the family would pull together and all that. And that became this Miller Boy, that moment that some people said, oh, that's all hoke. Well, for a lot of people in the country, it's not, because people are hoping at least that things end up like that.
Mm-hmm.
I see it more as something being positive about kids and families and stuff like that. So what I would do is I would always write to something that would be really positive, try to keep up the old values and just inject them into the newer world. Because there's a lot of good stuff about the new world we live in these days. And like I said, the computer age and things, there's a lot of good stuff about it. It's just that you hear less about the good stuff, and I would try to reintroduce the good stuff. That's the family stuff, especially family values.
Yeah, you nailed that for sure. Rich, I'm on the distribution end now of a documentary that I made about Heather O'Rourke. Took about 3 years in the making, and she appeared on 2 episodes of the new Leave It to Beaver. Having worked with her on Happy Days, do you have any memories or any stories that stand out that that you recall from Heather?
Yeah, well, first of all, when we worked with her, it was a coup to get her. It was so cool. Everybody really, really wanted her. The casting people wanted to get her, and Linda Pearl was playing Fonzie's girlfriend,
yep.
Ashley, and Heather actually looked like she was related to Linda Pearl, which was even better. But the funniest thing that I remember about Heather, and I loved her. I mean, she was just a sweet kid, unbelievably professional. She would know everybody's lines. She would know. I mean, she was just a great kid. I mean, she was a spark of light. I really, really liked her. But one thing that was really funny is when she got the part, and we sat down for the first table read, where Heather's character and Linda Pearl's character are working together. It was the first time that Heather was in the show, and Jerry Paris, who was directing the show, he had been told, "Oh, we got the girl from Poltergeist," and Poltergeist was such a scary movie, and everybody knows who she is, and everybody knows her catchphrase from the movie and all that stuff. So we've got this girl, and it's this great thing for us and everything. So Jerry sat down and said, at the meeting, and there's probably 40, 50 people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It was a production meeting as well as a cast read. He said, and now I wanted to let you know that we have this girl, Heather O'Rourke, and it was so great to get her because you remember her. She scared us so badly in the movie Poltergeist. Well, I mean, that'll show you right there that Jerry didn't see the movie. But immediately, the first thing she said, she went, wait a minute, I didn't scare anybody. They scared me. And everybody started laughing.
That is funny.
It was like if a comedian had been there to make everybody at ease, told a joke, and everybody started laughing.
Yeah.
And it was Heather. It was this little girl. I think she was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 or whatever she was. She was a little, she was even smaller than that. This was like 1984.
7. Yeah, 7.
Yeah, she was 7. It was like 1984 or something, or 82.
82.
It was 82. Okay, well, so she said that, and she upstaged Jerry and made the whole room laugh. And of course, she was right.
That's great.
She's not the scary person in the movie. It's the ghosts that are scary. But Jerry really hadn't seen the movie, so when he misspoke about it, and she, and she did it in this angelic voice, and she was so sweet, but it was so funny. I didn't scare anybody. They all scared me. That was so funny. And it was perfect because she was 100% right. Anyway, it was a great way to start that day and to start that season with her. And so she was really awesome. I went to her funeral, and I was really, really upset about it. I just thought that was one of the worst things. She was such a good kid. And by the way, I mean, I've directed and produced and written for kids my whole life.
Yep.
You see some kids who come along, they have to be coaxed into things, or you see a kid that, and I don't want to name any names, who people seem to know because he gets a part in a movie or something like that, and then you work with him in real life, and it's like, oh my God, how did this happen? But Heather was like a little Shirley Temple. She was just totally with it. Couldn't have been nicer. Behind the scenes would sit down and talk to you. She just was awesome. She was such a pretty, sweet, smiling. She was like a little ball of light. It was really awesome. And so when I heard what happened to her, I was just so upset about that. Tom Miller and Bob Boyette and I were really affected by that. We felt terrible about that. And so, like I said, I went to her funeral, and, I sat with Linda and Fred Fox, and it was really, moving and sad. It was really sad because she probably would have had a really good career. Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, things like that just are not good. I had a brother that died when he was 7, so I related to that a lot, and it was like just one of those things that happens, and you just go, wow, just terrible. Life isn't fair when stuff like that happens. But her time spent with us, she was really, really, really influential and really a great energy, and she's just a great kid. And as I said, the moment she opened her mouth, which wasn't even part of the script, on Happy Days, everybody laughed and everybody loved her. So that's what I remember the most about her.
Thanks for sharing that, Rich. After spending many years on this doc now, I think I've heard, you think you hear every story, and then you find out more people knew her, and, that have stories, and it's like, oh, I just want to hear that for me now. So,
well, she had no problem. She had literally no problem telling the truth and speaking up in a room of 50 people. The network was there, the studio was there, the cast was there, all the writers were there, the network executives were there, everybody was there. I mean, it was one of those things, we did that, every week. Those would be big audiences in those rooms, and she just had absolutely no problem. She was just this innocent kid, but what she said was like perfect. It was perfect because she came across as much smarter than the director, which I thought was hilarious. That was really great.
Yeah, she was going to be a brilliant behind the camera person for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your progression. Bryan's got the next question here.
So you had a string of producing and directing credits. Now, what piqued your interest in directing, and do you recall your first opportunity at that profession?
Well, I was always really more fascinated by what was going on behind the camera than what was in front of it. I can remember that we had a lot of pretty good directors, which, again, I was lucky. We had good directors when I was acting, not just on Leave It to Beaver, but on Leave It to Beaver, we had one director named Norman Abbott who would, kneel down and get on your level and talk to you, and very, if he wanted you to do something specifically or you weren't doing something he wanted, he would go and talk to you one-on-one instead of shout across the camera aisle, do this, do that. So I got to see that, that kind of personal touch always worked better with kids. And, you don't want to put kids on the spot. You want them to be comfortable. And that was really good. And then we had a guy named David Butler on that show who literally had started directing movies in the silent days. And I loved him because he could tell you stories about, Laurel and Hardy and things like that. But he knew what he wanted. And he, as an older guy, appreciated the kids and wanted the kids to perform for him, so he was involved. He wanted to know about your life, and he wanted to know about what you were doing. And of course, he loved my dad. But we had directors who were pretty focused on the kids, and so that really rubbed off on me. And then, I stopped acting basically because I went to a Catholic high school that said you can't act. You can't go to school on the set and go to school here. It's too strict.
Ooh.
It's too hard a curriculum. So that's how I stopped acting. But during all that time, I was much more fascinated by film and how the movies were made and what was happening, behind the scenes. And in my relationship with Harold Lloyd, which was really awesome, I was like his film curator, and he was literally one of my best friends. That put me hands-on with 35 millimeter film and printing and projecting, and I just got to be really good at post. And so I kind of saw that that's the way my career was going, rather than the acting thing. As a kid, I never considered myself a television star. I considered myself someone who was acting in TV. The stars were John Provost and Rusty Hamer and Jerry Mathers and people like that. Those were the kid stars that were names. I always considered myself, just a kid who was lucky enough to get some parts and things like that. But behind the scenes, I thought there'd be much more opportunity for somebody who loved this, who came from an acting background, who had a post-production background, who understood writing, who was raised by a writer, was raised by a comedian. And I was right, it just paid off that way. So I was just more interested in things behind the scenes, and I was always directing. I was directing plays. I was directing radio shows with a tape recorder my dad had bought me, and I was always directing movies with my friends or whatever. I was always doing stuff like that. So I felt that I could get performances out of people, especially young people, and so I just stuck with that. That to me was more interesting, and I kind of knew from a young age what I wanted to do.
So now you were talking, so it made me kind of think that when we talked to Stephen Talbot, his father as well was also in the business for a very long time at that point, and he knew what Hollywood could do to children. So his father kind of limited on what he could do. He couldn't sign a contract. Was that the case with you, or did you sign a contract? How did that work with you?
Nobody signed contracts that was underage. If you signed a contract, it had to be co-signed by your guardian or your parent. So anything the agents brought down the pipe, there was always a place for a double signature. I don't remember me signing weekly contracts with things like Beaver, but the parents had to sign it because if you're underage, you can't sign anyway. You know what's funny about Stephen Talbot's dad? The very first show I ever did in my whole life was Love That Bob, which was the Bob Cummings show, and Steve's dad was in that episode because he was a regular on that show. So one of the first actors I ever worked with was Steve Talbot's dad. That's such a strange coincidence. But getting back to your thing, no, your parents, my father and mother understood Hollywood. I mean, inside and out, they knew everything about it. They knew certainly the upside of it, and they knew a lot of the downside of it. That's what my dad, I told you a while ago, that's why my dad said never try to figure it out, which was really good advice. But they didn't think that I was going to be corrupted by it or something like that. I was still enrolled in regular school. I still had regular friends. I still went to, dated girls or whatever it was, or had to have my report cards. And, I was a normal kid the whole time. So, I don't think my dad was wary of the fact that, school or acting may turn me into something or cause something bad to happen. I think both my parents were looking out for me and wouldn't let that happen anyway. Because remember, my parents were pretty strict. They were great parents, but they, didn't put up with funny business either. You had to, as a kid, you had to do your thing. You had to go to school and you had to behave and you had to mind. And, it was all of that stuff. I mean, the acting thing didn't change any of that.
Rich, I figure you could probably write a book not only on your whole career, but I think it would be a massive, chapter by chapter of every project you've worked on. You probably could write its own book. One of them, you worked on a show called Step by Step that was about blended family, which was sort of a knockoff of the Brady Bunch. But, growing up in the 90s, I didn't watch the Brady Bunch. I watched Step by Step, and I, was kind of stuck in my own blended family that I didn't enjoy, and watched every Friday night a Step by Step, in a situation which I wish I would have been stuck in. Can you give me, because you talk about behind the scenes a lot, about how you were interested in learning, maybe the technical side, but as a fan, what behind the scenes of Step by Step would I be surprised to know? Or, how involved were you in guiding those young actors with any issues they might have been facing at the time?
Well, Step by Step, I was on literally from the first day. I was director on the pilot. Step by Step was another kind of brainchild of Tom Miller's. And as you said, it was close to some other shows. But one of the things that was great is Tom, everybody had to audition for parts except some of the leads. Now, Suzanne Summers and Patrick Duffy, both coming off huge hits. The network wanted to be in business with Suzanne.
Sure.
Everybody knew who she was. The network wanted to be in business with Patrick. And to get the two of them together to star in a show was a really big thing for them, and they were able to do that. But I was really looking forward to it because it had so many kids in it, and that's another show that it was just a blast to go to work. That was one of the nicest stages I was ever on because I was always happy to be around those people, and that show kind of went the way Suzanne and Patrick went, and Suzanne and Patrick were the most professional, the most fun, the sweetest people. Patrick Duffy had made a number of shows, all dramas, like Dallas, things like that. and you wouldn't believe how good he was at physical comedy. I mean, he was like Buster Keaton or somebody. I mean, he could do stunts and fall down the stairs and do all these things with his hands and, juggle. And it was crazy. I mean, the guy was a great physical comedian as well as one of the nicest people ever. So I just had such a great time on that show. And then they needed a spike in that show. They needed a guy like Fonzie, and that's where Sasha Mitchell came in.
Yeah.
Sasha was the guy that got to play Cody. And in real life, Sasha was exactly the character Cody. Literally exactly. He wasn't putting that on. That wasn't a fake. He was like this dude. Hey, this is really cool, dudesy. I'm like, he was like always running around on motorcycles, and he was a crazy man. But then you see, when he showed up, Sasha and I made fast friends. We had our own handshake. When they wanted to get him out of his dressing room early, they'd send me up to get him because he was and he just became this like really good friend of mine. So everything about that show, the girls, the little kids, everything about that show was really fun. Really fun. And so, Miller Bryon said, look, you're great with kids, direct this pilot, and then start directing this show. And I went, okay. I was in the days when I would, do Step by Step one week and Family Matters the next week, and then Full House next week. I mean, I was rolling. There was a lot going on, but practically all of those shows dealt with young people. Step by Step was just a blast. It was one of the nicest shows I ever worked on. It was great to come to work because Suzanne and Patrick were so great.
Did you mentor Sasha through his trouble that he had when the show went to Hawaii and, he got involved in a scuffle with his wife and all that? Like, were you there for him for that time?
I sure was. That was a strange situation. Sasha was one of the scariest people that you ever saw. Like, he was fighting with his wife, and I don't think physically fighting, but because his wife was, I don't know how else to describe her. She was a bit of a character. I think that's a nice way of putting it. And so I'm not so sure how much of that problem was actually initiated by Sasha. But what was cool is, or not cool, but what was interesting is somebody got a call. The guys downstairs at the Grand Wailea, at the hotel in Maui, got this call saying, hey, there's a disturbance up in room so-and-so and so-and-so. So they sent up like 2 security guards and some other guy, assistant manager, and they knocked on the door. And Sasha opened the door, and they said, hey, come on, man, we hear you're fighting. You can't do anything like that. You're coming with us. And he said, I'm not coming with you. And he said, they said, come with us. And he said, well, step inside the room and see if you can make me come with you.
Oh,
so they totally got scared. They went downstairs and came back with 9 other guys. That's how worried they were about Sasha, because he was a known martial artist, a great fighter, and he was mad. He was mad, and he was fighting with his wife. I got to tell you honestly, I'm a Sasha supporter. I don't ever condone any kind of domestic violence, but I'm not so sure about some of the allegations about Sasha, because he loved his kids. He'd do anything for his kids. And the wife and he got in a fight about these kids. And I didn't know her very well, but from what I had seen of her, I was a bit wary of what her claims were about what really went down with that. But anyway, what happened was, in the middle of the night, I was asleep, and the phone rang, because Sasha was allowed like 1 phone call from jail, because they threw him in the clink in Maui. And the phone rang. It was like, I don't know, 3 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. I thought, this must be a production problem. I picked it up, and I heard this guy go, Dudesy, hey, man, it's me. Guess where I'm at? And I went, where? And he went, I'm in jail. Like, it was like great. Like he was having fun. I mean, it was so crazy. So I got Michael Warren. And we went down there and bailed him out of jail, and then, continued the show with him. Mm-hmm. But, everybody was concerned. Domestic violence isn't funny. And
right.
Sasha was a crazy guy. And it was that wasn't good, but he was just such a nice guy. I mean, I have very little bad things ever to say about Sasha Mitchell, because with me, Cody became a really popular character, but with me, he just couldn't have been nicer. I mean, he was just cooperative and funny, and this was one of the best examples of an actor who could score and be really funny, literally playing himself. There wasn't one thing different between the time you said action and the time you say cut. If you'd say cut, he'd walk around and talk and do exactly the same thing he was doing when you were shooting, because he was the same guy. So I don't know. I really liked Sasha, and he was really sweet to my family and my son, and he was a really good guy. And I don't, like I said, I don't condone any kind of domestic violence of any kind. But I'm not so sure that the reports about some of the stuff he did was exactly accurate. I doubt that they were as accurate as people may have thought they were, because I think there was an ulterior motive to it, and I just don't want to get into that so much. But
no, that's fine. I didn't want to bring up negative things, but
I'm more of an advocate for the truth about stuff, and I don't know if that was really truthful. I think Sasha got blamed for a lot of stuff that he either wasn't responsible for or didn't do.
Yeah. And Stacey Keenan got along with him off camera, because obviously they were nemesis on camera. But he was probably friendly with everybody, right?
Oh, yeah. And Stacey was, the world's most professional actress. Christine Lakin, Angela Watson, and Stacey Keenan were all fabulous. I mean, they're fabulous pros. Stacey's super, super good actress. So she had no interest in Sasha one way or the other, just almost like the character had no interest in her. She was always crazy about Dana, and she was always rolling her eyes. It was kind of like, the character of Laura on Family Matters. Kelly Williams was always rolling her eyes because Urkel would say, "Hi, Laura." I was like, "Oh my God." So that's kind of what the characters were. That was the dynamic of the two characters. But Stacey was a pro. Stacey would show up and do her thing. She didn't think one way. I'm sure she had boyfriends and had lived a normal life. She didn't really pay much attention to Sasha, aside from the fact that they played these characters on stage. But she had no problem working with them. Nothing that I can remember. She was fine.
Nice. All right. So my next question kind of goes into what we were talking about stars who seem to kind of get themselves in trouble. And the one reason why I wanted to get your kind of just insight on this a little bit is because not only were you on camera when you were a child and on television, you've worked on so many shows like What I Like About You with Amanda Bynes and Hannah Montana with Miley Cyrus. You've worked with the Olsen twins. You've worked with a lot of, and these happen to be all girls, but is there some sort of, extra pressure that are put on young female stars of shows that lead them to have some of these troubled adulthoods? Like, it breaks my heart to see what Amanda Bynes has gone through over the last few years. The Olsen twins seem to be very recluse and very not in the public spotlight anymore. And, Miley Cyrus has kind of done this whole 180-degree spin. What's your thought, being a former child star, looking at these child stars and maybe some of the struggles that they're dealing with to where they're at now?
Well, the thing that's common, and all of us know this, is that if you're a young kid and you're in the spotlight and you're a star and people are fawning all over you, and you have a dressing room and ADs are trying to get you on stage and this and that, and everybody thinks it's great, and you're getting fan letters, and all of a sudden you're a kid. So then what's going to happen when you're 20? Because most of the time, 90% of the time, kid actors that are well-known don't make it as actors when they're older. And so what happens is they're in the spotlight and everybody's paying attention to them, and then suddenly at a really young age that goes away, and then suddenly you're kind of left with this feeling like, what happened? How come people don't pay as much attention anymore? So I think that's a common syndrome with all the kids that you work with. I think that's a common thing that happens. Now, I can be specific about some of these people. Like, for instance, Miley is and was and still is an incredibly sweet, nice person. Now, Miley did all the stuff like the nudity and the twerking and the craziness and the tongue and weird hair and all. So people thought, Miley Cyrus, she's gone crazy. She's gone nuts. What's the matter with her? No. All of it was calculated. Trust me, because Miley did one of the smartest things she could ever do, which was she broke the Disney image. Because a lot of kids that come from Disney end up being known about Disney. People who pay to go see Miley Cyrus concerts are not paying to see Hannah Montana.
No.
They're paying to see Miley.
Yep.
And Miley is really successful. And she's taken seriously, really seriously, in the music business. And a lot of that was precisely, a calculated, endeavor on her part to break that image. And she was really successful at doing it. So Miley doesn't fit the mold of these kids that, have this, superstardom as a kid and then never do anything afterwards. And so I applaud her for that. I also really like her. She's exactly the same as she ever was. And by the way, last year, she sent everybody that was involved in Hannah Montana these huge bouquets because it was like the 15th anniversary or something. So she didn't turn her back on that.
Wow.
But what she did, she created her own persona, and her own persona is worth millions and millions a year because she's taken seriously as a musical performer. That was great. So all of that was calculated. Miley, if I saw her in the street, would be the same Miley I knew when she was on stage as Hannah, and she was a sweetheart and still is a sweetheart. Amanda was a different situation. Amanda Bynes was one of the nicest kids ever and a fantastic actress, unbelievably talented actress, just got it. She could do subtle little things as a kid that, most adults couldn't do. So she was really, really, really good. She didn't have a very good relationship with her parents, at least that I know of. And I think it was one of those situations, now I'm guessing at this, so don't quote me, but
sure.
I think it was one of the situations where the parents wanted her to keep working because half of the parents' livelihood was being made off the kids. That's another problem. See, in Miley's situation, that didn't occur.
Right.
In Jerry's situation, that didn't occur. But there's a lot of times when families will use the kids to, pay their bills, pay the rent, do this, do that. And I think there was problems with that with Amanda. Amanda was somebody who really did kind of go off the deep end. When I directed What I Like About You, which was a couple of years after the Amanda show, I thought she was a more calloused person than she used to be. The sweetness that she had on stage seemed to be drifting away. And I don't know if it was a crowd of people she was running around with because I didn't keep up with that. But I found her changing pretty quickly. And then later, she actually looked, she was exhibiting kind of like mental stress.
Okay.
So she had some serious problems. That's really sad because she's such a talented actress. I mean, she was a sweetheart. I mean, the way she treated the Make-A-Wish kids and everything was fantastic. I mean, she was great. But she actually had problems. I don't know if they were drug-related or in with the wrong crowd or problems with the home life or I don't know. But she actually came away really doing some crazy stuff. So
yeah,
unfortunately, she was like a lot of the kid actors that kind of go the wrong way. You asked me about Miley, and you asked me about Amanda, and who was the third one?
I mentioned the Olsen twins, not because they've gone off the deep end.
Oh,
or
well,
anything,
the Olsen
but
twins.
Because
I started working with the Olsen twins when they were 10 months old.
Right.
I mean, I was directing them forever, and then not only did I do Full House with them, but I also did So Little Time with them, and I also did Two of a Kind with them. So I did 3 TV series with the Olsen twins. Sweet, really nice girls whose dad was smart enough to know that there was such a thing called home video, and got
yep.
Disney came to the Olsen twins and said, "We want to make a." This is when they were like, I don't know, 7 or 8. We want to make this kind of Disney home video of the girls running around Disneyland and dealing with Mickey and Donald and all the characters. And Dad said, "Okay." So they made this thing, and it sold millions of copies. So Disney said, "We want to put the girls under contract." And the father went, this is Dave Olsen, he went, wait, hold on. Why do I need Disney?
Right.
I can make my own films and sell these things in supermarkets and Kmart and Target and make a fortune. And he did. He was this entrepreneur that got these kids. He and this guy named Robert Thorne actually were the guys that did it. They got these kids involved in the home video at the time market and absolutely made a fortune. So the Olsen twins, they had their own TV shows, but they were always out there. And then it got to the point where they were making so much money that they were literally 2 of the wealthiest people in Hollywood. We were doing a show called So Little Time. My wife was the assistant director on it.
Oh, okay.
And we were doing this show at Universal. This was back around 2000 or something, maybe 2001, something like that. And the girls were really professional. They were never late. They went to go to lunch off the Universal lot, and after lunchtime, it was time for them to get back, and they weren't there. Then 10 minutes they were late, and they weren't there. We tried to call them. We couldn't get them. About 20 minutes later, they pulled in, and they were, "Oh, my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And we said, "Yeah, come on, guys. We got a lot to do because we have a run-through today." And they went, "Oh, we're so sorry. We were off-lot. We were at the Burbank airport." And I said, "Well, what were you doing there?" And they said, we were buying a Learjet." It was like, it was what?
Okay.
They're like 14-year-old girls.
Right.
And we're buying this Learjet, and they wanted us to, look at the interior, like the wall color and the furniture, to make sure we approved it. It was like, well, they were referred to for years as Hollywood's mini moguls, and they were.
Yeah. So
Ashley and Mary-Kate, I don't think there was ever a problem with them. I don't think they ever got crazy or did anything like that. I know Mary-Kate, who was a sweetheart. I know she married a guy that was a lot older, but they made so much money. And then they got into the clothing thing. What was it? It's Elizabeth and Charles or whatever. It's Elizabeth and somebody. They named their clothing line after their brother and sister, and that took off and they were like, the runway stars. And I wouldn't be surprised if they aren't billionaires. When Jeff Franklin approached them and said, "We want you to be in Fuller House," they were like, "Nah, we don't need to do that," because they were over it.
Yeah.
They didn't want to act anymore. They have nothing but money. They have personal lives that they're fine on their own. People go, "Oh, Mary-Kate's too thin," or "Ashley doesn't look the same," and they're like, "Yeah, that was my life then. We have our own lives now," and they're unbelievably successful. I mean, they're the most successful kids I've ever directed. So it's like, it's crazy how successful they were. And by the way, when Bob Saget very unexpectedly died, and we were all brokenhearted about that, there was a memorial service for him that I saw Ashley and Mary-Kate at. They were happy to come to it. And they were still the same nice, normal kids. They were still, they're not kids anymore, but
right.
they were still the same people that I had worked with. And they were great. They were fine. So there was nothing wrong with Miley, and there was nothing wrong with Ashley and Mary-Kate. Ashley and Mary-Kate were absolutely moguls. Miley was really smart. Amanda was the one that really kind of had problems. But the other ones, no. Everything was calculated. Everything was done for a reason.
Rich, I really appreciate you kind of diving into those curiosity topics for me. I know we're over time, and I'm going to give Bryon the last question here.
Okay.
Nick and I had the pleasure of interviewing Tony Dow, and as everyone knows, sadly we lost him over this past summer. Can you kind of elaborate on the memories you have of him and what it was like to work with him?
Again, Tony was like an older brother because he could have been somebody who, being 3.5 years older than Jerry and I, he could have been someone who just said, "Yeah, I'm here to do my lines, and I'll play Wally, and I'll see you guys later. I'm going to go do my thing." He never was like that. He was showing us how to shoot hoops. He was talking about sports. He would invite us to his house. We went to the movies with him and Ken Osmond. He was a really good gymnast, and he was like a pro diver. He was a great diver, too. He was just someone we looked up to, but we looked up to him because he was also a really good friend of ours. I always remember Tony and Ken as guys that could have blown us off and didn't. They were just like super nice. So, Jerry was the oldest in his family, in his real family, but he actually had kind of an older brother, and that was Tony. And Tony stayed in touch with people over the years. Never turned his back on the show, never turned his back on his friends or the cast. He was just a good guy. He was always one of the reasons it was fun to go to see Leave It to Beaver. And, you never had to worry about walking on eggshells or anything like that being around Tony, because he was just this laid-back, really cool guy. So I always liked him. I always admired him a lot. But the thing I liked the most about him was that he accepted us, the younger kids, He accepted us like we're part of his family, and I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, it was really, really nice talking with him. And while we were talking with him, you could pick up the humbleness of him. I mean, he was just so humble and genuinely nice that, he didn't understand that his impact in the world. He just thought, it's just what it is. He's like, I just did that. I enjoyed it. And it was, but he didn't think it was like, he didn't understand why it had so much praise behind it.
Well, the other thing that was really nice and very briefly, what was really nice is I saw him, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years ago. We were doing something. We were eating, we were having lunch or something. I think Jerry was there too. And, Tony had gone on to direct. He was directing. And he was directing some sitcoms here and there. And he came over to me and he said, look, I got to tell you, I'm really proud of you. It's like, this is something an older brother would say. He said, I'm really proud of you for doing, I kind of followed your career, and I'm really proud of you for doing all that work. You don't do show after show after show if you weren't good at what you're doing, so I'm actually proud about it. And I see that's what I mean. It was like, that's something your older brother really would say to you. And so that's the way, he had a nice career as a director, and he was just acknowledging that somebody else from the cast did the same. I just thought that was, really nice of him. He didn't have to do that. It was just sweet.
Well, thank you very much, Rich, for your time. We really appreciate the interview and taking time to share some memories and stories of your career and your experiences.
Yeah, we really do appreciate it.
I've had a great time in my life, you guys, working in Hollywood, being brought up in it. I was brought up by people who were really nice. My experiences with most of the celebrities we ever knew were usually 99% positive. And I got into this business of making TV shows, but it was just so much fun. I appreciated the people I worked with, but I appreciated that they liked me and spent time with me too. So I'm just a lucky guy that had a ton of fun. I tell people all the time on Beaver, all we did was we got paid for having fun. And I kind of feel that way about my whole career because I just had a great time doing it. So, I'm a lucky guy. I'm happy that you guys are interested and want to talk about it, but I'm always happy to talk about it because it meant a lot to me and it always brings back good memories.
Thank you very much for your time, Rich. Take care now.
I gotta go now, Beav. Okay. Goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver. See you, Beav. So long, Richard.
All right. I want to thank Rich Carell for joining me today in this interview. I also want to thank Nick Bailey from Fancounters.com for accompanying me with this interview as well today. If you haven't picked up Bryon Humick's book yet, the world-famous Beaverpedia, that can be found on Amazon, or just simply scan the QR code that'll be appearing on your screen right about now. So long, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we will see you soon. Thanks. Bye.